energy law, because matters of energy law are very closely connected to matters of environmental law. We'll see down the stretch that even in the treaties, and especially in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, you will see that there are certain articles about the European Union's environmental policy directly followed by the European Union's energy policy. So in the Articles 191 et sequentes of the TFEU, we have the environmental policies of the European Union, and in 194, which we're going to encounter today, actually, you have the basis for the European Union's energy law. So these topics are neighboring ones already in the treaties. And by talking about the treaties, of course, I assume that you guys are already familiar with the general elements in regard to European Union law. In terms of energy policy, I had pointed out that initially the communities had a very core aim of bringing together the economies of the member states and enhancing their economical situation. And that means that trying to bring together the economies of the member states also meant that the communities wanted to harmonize to a certain point the energy policy of those member states. Of course, we were talking about a very basic and not very elaborated energy policy back then in the 1950s, 1960s, dealing also, of course, with matters of the value chain of raw materials that were energy related, and even back then matters of sustainability occurred in the considerations of the communities. It happened in the 1970s that there was a grave energy crisis. So most of the member states actually had issues with supplying energy, supplying their citizens with energy as necessary in order to survive. So the communities tried to find common harmonized solutions to that energy crisis. But as I mentioned, in the early 1970s, also the United Kingdom became part of the communities back then, and it became apparent quite soon that the member states of the communities were not at the same page, energy policy wise. That led to the fact that only in the 1980s, first secondary legal acts in the area of energy policy were issued. For instance, Regulation 625 of 1983, which aimed at coordinating in a more efficient way the energy policy of the member states of the communities. That was possible because in 1979 there was a political change in the UK, and the Thatcher administration was more open to a more coordinated energy policy of the European communities. That's how this regulation could be politically explained. That, of course, was followed by a certain white paper. And you know, those white papers are normally issued by the Commission whenever indicating some future proposals of legislation. White papers are normally shared by the Commission in order to understand whether the member states are on the same page or not. So there was a white paper issued in the early 1990s aiming at an energy policy for the European Union as a whole. As we had mentioned, following the Maastricht Reform Treaty, we are talking about the European Union as some sort of successor nowadays to the European communities. And of course, further secondary legal acts followed. For instance, an agency for the cooperation of the member states' energy regulators was established, the so-called ACER agency, which is situated nowadays in Slovenia, in Ljubljana. So we talked about the basic institutions. There are further organs to be mentioned. They are not, of course, emphasized through Article 13 of the Treaty of the European Union as the institutions are, which we mentioned before. It doesn't mean that they do not exist. There is a whole lot of so-called decentralized agencies to be found all over the place, actually. Each member state is the seat to one or more decentralized agencies. Decentralized in the sense in which, well, you know, of course, that most of the institutions which we mentioned before are located either in Belgium, in Brussels, or in Luxembourg, or as it happens in the case of the European Parliament, also in Strasbourg in France. And the European Central Bank is located in Frankfurt, in the German city of Frankfurt am Main. The decentralized agencies, for instance, the one dealing with the cooperation of energy regulators, that one, those decentralized agencies are in different cities all over the member states, not only in the capital cities of them, also in smaller states, in smaller cities to be encountered. So to sum up this very first information about the development of energy policy of the European Union, the core goals of the treaties governing the communities were economic ones in the 1950s. That led to the fact that also elements of the energy policy were of importance for the communities. But it was not easy to bring the member states on the same page due to their, well, differences in infrastructure, as well as the differences in their own national approach regarding energy policy. It was particularly difficult to bring the member states on the same page due to the fact that that especially the bigger states like the UK, France, also Germany were not on the same page regarding the way in which the best possible answer could be found for the apparent energy crisis in the early 1970s. That's why only in the 1980s a more coordinated energy policy between the member states was possible, and then of course further secondary legal acts followed. Let's get now to the contemporary legal basis of energy law, as mentioned before, Article 194 of the TFEU. Well, what's Article 194 TFEU about? So, we are finding ourselves in Article 194 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. The matter of energy law, as it is governed by the Lisbon Reform Treaty. And there are certain goals, certain obligations also, which are to be met by Article 194. We said, first of all, that the energy policy belongs to the shared competences between the Union and the member states. You will remember the principle of subsidiarity, which we talked about in the initial stages of this very lecture today. And you will find those shared competences in Article 4 of the TFEU. In Article 194 of the TFEU, in the neighborhood also of environmental policy of the Union, you will find here the basis of the European Union's energy law. What are the obligations? What are the goals / obligations of the European Union's energy law? First of all, based on Article 194 para 1 letter A, to ensure the functioning of the energy market. You're familiar with the fact that the European Union, or maybe the biggest success story within the European Union up to now, is the internal market. the internal market, which makes sure that trade can be executed between the member states without any obstacle. You have to imagine this giant internal market as being composed of so much more smaller markets regarding various products, for instance, energy. And the energy market is a part of the internal market. Therefore, ensuring the functionality of the internal market, which is the most significant goal of the European Union based on the treaties, it also means that the Union has to ensure the functioning of the energy market as a part of the internal market. Another quite important element here is to ensure the security of energy supply in the Union, which has become increasingly difficult in the light of various crises and various wars on this planet in the last years. We'll come to that in later stages of this lecture today. The next goal would be energy efficiency, and to make sure that renewable forms of energy are included in the energy production. And last not least, the promotion of interconnectivity of energy networks. So these are the main goals and obligations which both the European Union and the member states, remember the principle of subsidiarity, will have to meet in terms of having an efficient energy law. Is that understandable? If you understood that, you've understood like the very core of the European Union energy policy. I already pointed out that the energy policy competence is a shared one between the Union and the member states, as you can see in Article 4, as indicated here, of the TFEU. And 194 has been seen in many scientific works as a uniform legal basis for the energy policy actions of the European Union. Since in most cases the member states have not found themselves capable of meeting the goals of 194, in most cases the Union, based on the principle of subsidiarity, as mentioned before, legislates instead of them, and that has led to, well, a number of regulations. Some of them I've indicated before on slides before. And there is, especially in light of the ongoing situation on this in this world with various wars, an extensive need for uniform regulations in order to emphasize energy resources and in order to support the aforementioned 4 goals of Article 194, Para 1. What else is here to be mentioned is, of course, that Article 194 emphasizes so-called spirit of solidarity. You know, this element of solidarity was included after the Lisbon Reform Treaty. That's one of the elements the Lisbon Reform Treaty brought with it, actually. They spread the word solidarity all over the treaties. You will find the term solidarity quite often. Does not mean that the solidarity between the member states has increased significantly over the last years. Au contraire, as my French friends would say. Well, the politicians creating the Lisbon Reform Treaty were of the opinion that, you know, if very core goals and obligations based on Article 194 TFEU in order to understand the general energy policy of the Union better. Having that in mind, there are some other provisions where I'm not going to go into detail of those, because each of them would actually deserve its own lecture series. Energy networks are foreseen by the Articles 170 et sequentes TFEU. So these energy networks are to support the goal of interconnectivity, which we talked about, the interconnectivity of relevant networks all over the member states. A supply security is also foreseen by Article 122 TFEU.